The ultimate cheat code in your career is your mindset. Everything whittles down to mindset because I think it is the thing that has helped me most in my career is just staying really focused on what I'm learning, how I'm growing, and how I'm showing up with a vision for the future versus getting caught up in the past.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. I'm so excited today to welcome Jenny Lewis to the As Unexpected podcast. Jenny Lewis, thanks so much for joining. It's great to have you here. I'd love to start off with you just giving some professional background about yourself for our listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Scott. I'm thrilled to be here and to get the chance to chat with you this morning. So my name, as Scott mentioned, is Jenny Lewis. I am a Chief Marketing Officer and President at a company called The Knot Worldwide. We own about 19 global brands in 16 countries around the world and support couples usually on their way to the altar, whatever that may look like, and are experts in the wedding space. I also serve as president of two of our smaller businesses, The Bump and The Bash. I've been at the company for about 2 years. Prior to that, I had about an 8-year stint at Uber, where I climbed up the ranks, helped build the brand, and ultimately led our US and Canada marketing team. I am based in Boston with my husband and our 2-year-old Jack. And that's a little about me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And I think our listeners need to know, Jenny, that you were recently recognized by Fortune as a top 50 CMO. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was actually Forbes, but yes.
Forbes. Yes, that's what I meant.
The other F publication. Yes, such an honor and such a testament to the whole team that we have at the Knot Worldwide, who are just working tirelessly in and out for how we can keep innovating and pushing our brand forward and continuing to accelerate, because some of these brands like the Knot in the US has been around since the 90s, and it's easy for brands to get stale and tired, but we aren't letting that happen here.
And one of the things, Jenny, that it said in the press release that I saw was how they valued your leadership around embracing ambiguity. Mm-hmm. So that is core to this podcast. It's core to what I think about leadership. Clearly, it's something you give great consideration to in your role. Can you give our listeners a better sense of what it means to you about embracing ambiguity?
Oh, yes. That has been a huge part of my career journey. And as somebody who I tend to be a bit type A myself, and I like control. I like to know where things are going. I like to understand, if I do this, I get that, and a very linear step forward. I learned pretty early into my career, and frankly, just through being thrown into the deep end with lots of change, lots of unknowns, whether it was business strategy, budgets, resources, org structures, that I had very little control over a lot of things, even when I was in and am in senior leadership positions. And you kind of have to roll with the punches sometimes. And I had a leader when I was at Uber who gave me a really powerful reframe. That's something that stuck with me for a while, of when you're in those stormy seas of ambiguity and a lot is unknown, instead of just kind of riding the waves, view it as opportunity and embrace ambiguity as opportunity for when nothing is known. How can you kind of grab at the things and help make the path forward clearer? And so I actually, even though I am still a bit of that type A control freak, have grown to really embrace change and ambiguity, knowing that it will be an accelerant for my growth and for me to take on bigger and bigger challenges in my career.
I love it. Ambiguity is opportunity. Ambiguity is opportunity. That's great. It makes me think of one of these really simple phrases that I won't get exactly right, but it's from the Tao Te Ching, which says, learning is unlearning. It has more to it than that, but that's what I take away from it. Learning is unlearning. And so in this podcast, I really love when the guests are able to share some of the lessons, and given your time at Uber, now at the Knot, I'm sure you've had these moments where, something just went completely as unexpected, unplanned. And how did you show up, and what did you learn through that process about how you showed up as a leader, someone in practice of leadership, when something just completely went as unexpected?
Oh my gosh, I have so many examples that are going. When does anything ever go as expected? I think probably one of the more obvious examples. So I joined Uber when it was still in small startup mode, and was one of the earliest marketing hires. There were hundreds of employees, not tens of thousands. And I watched the company, I was a part of helping the company grow and grow and grow and scale. And rapid growth like that requires just constant agility. And I will say, what occurred during my time at Uber was change of CEO, a very big PR crisis, and that required just a ton of resilience to when your name and the name of your company and something that you've built and been a part of for so long is in the media. You're hearing about it from friends and family. Things are being said about the company that are so dissimilar to your own lived experience. And that took, was wildly unexpected. And conveniently, it was right around that time that I was actually doing a pretty big audit of my own leadership style. I had started taking on bigger and bigger teams, needed to reassess a bit of, how did I want to show up? Because I'd moved from, individual contributor to people manager to managing managers and managing teams in remote locations and so forth. And it takes different skills. And I didn't exercise right around that time when we were going through the PR crisis in 2017, that an executive coach asked me to reflect on a time that I was like performing up, just not even performing, but showing up at my best, like at my absolute best. And like in that flow and confident, and I owned it and feeling good. And really, he encouraged me. He's like, I want the first thing that comes to mind. I don't want you to overthink this. And the first thing that came to mind was when I was in high school, weirdly. And I just felt confident. The world was my oyster. I had a boundless energy and optimism. And he had me describe that girl from the outside. How did she show up? What did she look like? What was she doing? How was she carrying herself? And we kind of whittled it down to that she was showing up with a lot of grace. And so the word grace became a touchstone for me that year when everything felt unexpected. We were changing leadership. Things were, we were facing a ton of business challenges as a result of some of the PR crises. And I kept channeling. I literally had it on a Post-it note on my computer that just said grace and underlined. That's how I want to be showing up with my team in meetings, as somebody who can weather those storms with grace. And for whatever reason, that word worked for me that year. I think the word has probably changed and evolved as my leadership has changed and evolved. But I do come back to that during those times of ambiguity and change when everything is unexpected, of like, I want to be the leader that shows up like they can handle it. They're going to steady that ship. They're going to show up with grace and resilience, and they're not going to get knocked off course.
Yeah, if we could, I'd love to explore that idea of grace more, particularly as you say it's evolved for you over time. You've taken on more leadership, dual roles at the Knot worldwide. Can you share with our listeners what you mean exactly by that word grace now in your current role?
Yes. I would say, as I've kind of leveled my leadership and scope and so forth up, I think that grace is still there. But I think what my role now demands of me more than it did before is pairing that grace with vision. And so I think bringing that, not just steadying the ship, not just kind of navigating through it and that resiliency, but also where are we going and how to get others motivated and rallied around that idea and that vision and believing in it. So I would say that's probably the layer that I have added on as I've gotten more senior, but hopefully that grace is still there because it's been something I've been practicing for so long now.
Excellent. I love it. So obviously, in my current role, I think there's a very similar demand on me to make sure we have a long-term vision for the organization, for the program, but also making sure I understand that it's the people that make it happen.
Yep.
Right. And starting with the people first, exercise that long-term vision. One of the terms that and concepts that I truly try to focus on every day, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not, is this idea of compassion, not so much empathy or sympathy, but compassion, where I really try to start with the other. What's their life professionally, personally? How do I understand that? What's their growth? What do they want to grow into? So I'm curious, in your view, how you think about compassion in terms of your team, in terms of those on other teams. You have a large organization. How does that idea resonate with you in terms of your own leadership growth?
I love that. It completely resonates because we are all people at the end of the day. And I am in the camp of that. The idea of work-life balance is a little bit of a fallacy because work and life are one and the same in some ways. Work is a part of our life, and it's especially in this remote work world, it's really hard to separate the two. So I think having the context of where somebody's coming from, what they might be going through externally, and how they're bringing some of that and carrying that with them is incredibly helpful in having some of that compassion and understanding. It's interesting that you mentioned this because empathy typically in kind of years past, and I really like your reframe and shift towards compassion. Empathy is something that it's been a defining characteristic of my leadership style for a long time. I would say if you asked direct reports of mine from a decade ago, they would probably, empathetic would be one of the top terms that would come up. What I've come to realize is that is both a strength and a weakness. And there are moments that and I think this is something that I've realized even as early as this year, that I have a tendency to see every side of the equation. It is something I really do believe in the good in people. I try and really understand where people are coming from, what perspectives they have. At times that is valuable. At times it can slow me down and perhaps make me appear indecisive because I'm trying to weigh so many different perspectives and trying to find that right balance and trying to make everybody happy in the decision that's made. So I'm curious with compassion and, obviously there's some differences there, but if you've experienced that yourself, given that's part of your leadership profile as well.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratSea.org. Gosh, Jenny, I think that is one of the most profound things I've heard around leadership is how do you ensure that you do start with the other, you really understand the other, and you know that the organization has a direction, it has to move in that direction. And at times, if we're attending only to compassion, we won't move along fast enough, our productivity won't increase enough, our program won't improve enough. So it's a tension that I think we have to embrace. And I oftentimes think about courage and compassion when put together. So courage really is, as you've done so much in your career, is the idea of taking action amidst uncertainty and ambiguity, right? So then you have this compassion where you actually are starting to understand other people and embrace them and try to lift them up. But you also have to take action when you don't know.
Yeah.
And that kind of uncertainty can stress you out, but also your team members. You have to embrace them both at the same time, all the time.
Yeah.
And I would only say from my experience, it's showing up authentically.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is an uncertain path we're taking.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling? Let me tell you how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I'm gonna explain it to you. And we have to take action. We have to move forward. It's that open transparency, authenticity that I think can manage that natural tension.
I love that. It makes so much. I think that's really well put. And I think something that, you know, if I were to go back and get myself kind of chat with like 22-year-old Jenny, I think something that we aren't trained for coming in college and coming out of college is that so many of the decisions we make, as in the business world in particular, there's a lot of unknowns. And I think there's a degree of when you're going through school and you're trained to find the right answer. And there's generally, you know, you select A, B, C, or D. And if you guess A, you're wrong, it's C. And it's amazing, just especially as you get more and more senior, but I think it's true at all levels, that there's rarely a right or wrong answer in business. And there's probably some professions, maybe accounting, there's a right or wrong answer, but certainly in marketing, there rarely is. There's more just, how are you weighing the pros and cons? How are you evaluating the trade-offs? What are decisions that are kind of the two-way door decisions, which I think is a Jeff Bezos-ism of like, you can walk back through it. What are the one-way doors that you make it and you can't walk it back? And having some guts and courage and conviction in your point of view. And that's hard to train. And I see that a lot with my team. Of part of the coaching I give to them is just like trust their instincts a bit and trust their gut. Because if you try and, you know, look, and especially in this world where we have so much data at our fingertips, if you just spend too long in the numbers, sometimes you just lose sight of what you're solving for, and you just too slow to act, and you lose out on those instincts.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. I think your experience as a 22-year-old, I came to it later in my life, but I think, you know, I was for many years a professor in the business school. I taught strategy courses. And of course, I wanted, just as much as the students wanted, to give frameworks that gave answers.
Yeah.
Like, the SWOT, the SWOT, you know, if you do this analysis, you're going to come out with an answer. Let's do a case study. Oh, I'm going to grade you on whether you came up with the right answer or not. And over time, I learned that it wasn't the answer that was important. It was the rigor of the analysis, the thought process. What were they bringing in their own sort of gut intelligence around their thinking? And those frameworks that seem to indicate a right or wrong answer are wrong.
It's so true. And I think learning how to think and just how to evaluate and look at problems from different sides and is so valuable. So I think that insight is so true. It's not trying to find the right or wrong. Those frameworks are helpful because they teach you how to think and how to frame things up. I use SWOT all the time, but it's never going to give you a black and white.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a great time in the podcast. We're gonna turn to two of my very favorite people, Kuki and Kam. They have a great question for someone in your area, your discipline, your experience. I'm going to turn to them right now. So listen up.
So social media risk and cancel culture are the realities of the current landscape. I'm curious to know how companies can stay true to their story online while also protecting their brand and their brand's reputation. Kam, what do you think about that?
I don't know, Cookie. I think this is a good one. You know, I don't really know if I have an answer directly, but what I can think of is it's definitely easier to point out when a brand gets it wrong versus when a brand or a company gets it right. And so I'm curious when we pass it on what others think.
Okay, Jenny, what do you think about Kuki and Kam's question?
So it's a great one, and I think one that any modern marketer is thinking about quite critically right now. My lean towards it, and having chatted with a number of other marketing leaders and how they're kind of thinking about cancel culture in this space, is it's really about knowing your brand, knowing your purpose, and knowing your audience. Who are you speaking to, and who are you willing to, frankly, piss off? And that means you have a clear understanding of what you're saying, who you're saying it to, the values that you share, hopefully with your audience, the insights that you share with them as well too. So if you do find yourself in some hot water, you're at least being true to yourself, and you're at least not alienating your core and your customer base. So I really think it comes down to having a clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of your audience and who you're speaking to. So if things do go awry, hopefully they've got your back too.
That is spot on. And, we manage this within Semester C very often. We have a clear set of values. We have a clear purpose, and we are a microcosm of the world. You don't go on to our ship and suddenly escape the realities of the world, which brings in all types of challenges that reflect the challenges that we're all dealing with every day. And how do we stay true to our purpose? And when crises emerge, when difficulties emerge on a voyage, how do we make sure that we go back to that core, that purpose of what we're trying to achieve? Do you have any recent examples, or going back to Uber, where you felt the dynamic going on in the world of media, particularly social media, was presenting a threat to your organization, and you really had to retreat back to that purpose and make sure that you were holding true to it as a leader and as a team?
Sure, absolutely. So probably the example that comes top of mind, I mean, there's hundreds probably at this point, given how active and evolving the social landscape is. But the one that comes to mind most acutely is during my time at Uber when COVID hit. And obviously that was completely taking over the cultural dialogue in the US and globally. It was a really critical and frankly scary moment for our business. If you think about the impact of COVID on Uber, people aren't going out, they're quarantining. We want drivers to be safe. We want them to be staying home. It frankly, like overnight, the business went down to near zero. And it was a pretty shocking moment for the company. All that being said, I'm in marketing. I'm leading our US and Canada marketing team. What the heck are we supposed to be talking about on Instagram, Facebook, on Twitter? We have ad media buys that we had beautiful creative developed for talking about using our different products and so forth. We had to wind it all back. And we had this moment that we came together, that we were a bit like, what do we want to say? What's our role in this? How do we want Uber to show up in this moment? We're a well-known brand. We feel like we shouldn't be silent at this moment in time, but we certainly don't want to be out there pushing, get in an Uber when we know that isn't safe. So we actually took that conversation. It was with one of our ad agencies, Wyden and Kennedy. And we were kind of like, you know what? That's it. That's the insight. Don't take Uber. That's what Uber should be saying right now. And so we launched a campaign. We created a spot, I think it was a 30 or 60 second spot using all user generated content and so forth in under 2 weeks. Launched it on across some national media channels as well as across all of our socials. And the tagline, it was "Thank you for not riding." And it was literally thanking people for not riding Uber. And because that was core to our values, we believe in safety is one of Uber's top priorities and values. It's something, there's a huge safety team that was built out at Uber. That's something that the company really stood behind. And we knew the safest thing for Americans, because that's where the campaign was, to be doing at that time was to not be getting in an Uber at all. And so it was this really interesting, let's flip it on its head. And we're going to be a company that's not out there about corporate greed and trying to monetize this moment, but actually looking out for the good in society.
That is a case study that should be in every business school. Wow. that whole story. That's incredible. Listen, we're about to wind it up here, Jenny. I so appreciate your time. I would love it if you would leave our listeners with one piece of advice that they can carry with them around dealing with life when it goes as unexpected.
My number one piece of advice, and I talk about this with my team all the time, the ultimate cheat code in your career is your mindset. Everything whittles down to mindset. You can see the negative in any situation. You can also see the positive in any situation. So ultimately, it comes with nurturing yourself, filling your own cup, getting your mindset in the right place so that as those challenges come, because they will, every single day, some small, some big, that your mindset is clear, it's focused, and you're looking at it with optimism. So my number one piece of advice, my team knows I talk constantly about having a growth mindset, because I think it is the thing that has helped me most in my career, is just staying really focused on what I'm learning, how I'm growing, and how I'm showing up with a vision for the future versus getting caught up in the past.
That is the exclamation point on this podcast. Perfect. Growth mindset is the key to getting through the unexpected that life is always going to throw your way. Thank you so much for the time, Jenny. It's been a pleasure. I hope we meet up together in person soon.
Yes, likewise. Thanks so much for having me, Scott. This was fun.
Yeah. This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.